Hello, everyone. Today you will hear an interesting story. At the end of my workday, I was on my way home and was already mentally swimming in the pool when I was interrupted by a phone call. Hello. I put it on speakerphone on the dashboard attached phone. I got a call from the hospital saying my brother had been in a car accident and they found my number in his phone. I instantly turned the car around and raced toward the hospital, not even noticing how much speed I was exceeding. But luckily I didn't have to deal with the cops. When I got there I immediately rushed to the ward, but the nurse on duty stopped me. Where are you going? My brother. Mel Toran. I got a call that he'd been in an accident. The nurse leaned over a clipboard and looked up the name I'd given him. Yeah. They just moved him to his room. But he's still unconscious. Can I go to him? Yes. 205. But I told you. I didn't listen to the nurse anymore, and when I got the room number I rushed to see how my brother was doing. When I entered, he was lying with his torso wrapped in bandages and a cast on his right leg. His face was covered with cuts, to which band-aids had been neatly glued. I walked over to him and bent over. He was unconscious, with several sensors hooked up to him that showed on monitors his condition, and nearby, doses of medication were flowing into his system from and for. A doctor entered the room. He looked at me carefully, apparently realizing that I was a relative. How is he? I asked. I'm his brother. I decided to introduce myself right away so that the doctor could tell me all the information. The worst is over. We hope that he will wake up soon. He has several fractures. So he'll have to stay here for a while. The doctor persuaded me that I didn't need to be here all the time, so I talked to him about some bureaucratic things and decided to stay with my brother for a while, and I got home late at night. Where have you been? Gabriella, my wife, asked me from the doorway. I told her about the situation. She sincerely sympathized with me and offered me dinner, but I had no appetite at that moment. The next day I took a day off from work and went to the hospital. There the good news was waiting for me. At check-in, I was told that Mel had woken up. When I entered the room he looked at me with tired eyes. Mel, little brother. How are you? How could this happen? The doctor was just sitting next to him, examining him. Mr. Toran. Hello. Your brother's feeling better, as you can see, but it's best not to tire him too much. Well, I finished my examination. I'll leave you to it. My brother told me a little about what happened to him. He was still having a hard time talking. He began to talk about what had happened at the time of the accident. Describing the events, his voice was shaking from weakness. He said that he had been hit by a van on the highway outside of town, throwing his car into a ditch. And that it seemed to have been done intentionally, as the highway was almost empty and there were no obstacles to avoid. A little later a policeman came into the room, apparently informed that the victim had regained consciousness, and he rushed to us to take a statement. I asked the policeman to come back later, but Mel heard my pleas and said he could talk and was ready to answer any questions he had. While the policeman was asking questions, I tried to understand why anyone would want to harm my brother, since he had no ill wishes and was always friendly to everyone. He drove some furniture out of the warehouse of the store we worked in together, only he mostly handled the shipping and bills of lading and I did the deliveries. Sometimes we'd switch. And yesterday there were some urgent orders, the movers screwed up, and the furniture I was supposed to take away was loaded into another car, and I had to drive another car. Mel had to drive my van because the order needed to be delivered on time. I wanted to tell the policeman about it, but I didn't know how that would help the situation, and it took a long time to explain, so I decided to keep it to myself for now and try to figure it out for myself. When I returned from the hospital, I opened the door of our house, where the pleasant aroma of homemade food was already waiting for me. Gabriella was cooking dinner, despite her own fatigue after a long day at work. Gabriella worked in a store where her workday started early and ended late. She had little free time to do anything else except on weekends. How's your brother doing, Dan? She asked, never stopping with her culinary masterpieces. Better than yesterday, but he still has a long time to recover. I answered. Over the next few days, Mel felt a little better. Between visits to him and work, I spent the time on my own looking for someone who could have done this to my brother. I reached out to some of my longtime acquaintances whom I had helped considerably in my time. I knew they had the connections and resources to help me in this matter. One of them was Stan, a reliable and loyal friend whom I could trust. We arranged to meet in a bar, and I told him my story, telling him my own hunches about it as well. He listened to me carefully and promised to help. Stan, besides his business, was also engaged in some illegal business and said that he would try to find the culprit by his own methods, but that it would take some time. Over the next few days, I stayed in close contact with Stan, getting updates on the progress of his investigation. While this case was progressing, over the weekend my wife and I went to visit my brother together. Dan. He looks so awful. She shared her opinion when we left the room. Yeah, he does. The accident was awful. The doctor says it's a miracle he survived it at all. I wish there was something I could do. What can you do? Except pray for his recovery. What about that other driver? Did they find him? Not. But the police are doing everything they can. The officer said they should catch him soon. I noticed my wife looking sadly at the ward door as if she herself was responsible for what had happened. I put my arm around her. Don't worry, the culprit will definitely be found and punished. It was late, we went to Mel's room one more time, talked to him briefly, and drove home. On the way, Stan called me and invited me to meet him, telling me there were some results from the search, but that my presence was necessary. I took Gabriella home and drove myself to meet a friend. What? How'd it go? Did you find him? I was impatient to ask him questions. Yes, Dan. I think we found him. Come on, let's go. I'll show you something. He walked me into his office and pulled out some pictures from traffic surveillance cameras. I got a look at my van, as well as the intruder's van that had been behind my car for a while. Here, see, he's been driving it for a while. Unfortunately, there are no cameras around the crash site itself, but my people were able to figure out who rented this stalker van. We've already caught him. You have a chance to talk to him in person. Would you like to? Yes. Of course. I answered. Stan led me down several corridors, then we went down to a large basement room, which had several rooms with doors with small windows. As I walked past these rooms, I was reminded of some thriller movies. This basement reminded me of some of the plots from them. We walked past several rooms and reached a door, at which there was a huge bumpkin, covered in tattoos, clearly guarding the door. There. This is it. Open up, he said to the guard. Stan went in first, and I followed him. There was nothing inside except a lonely chair, to which a man of about 35, not cheap clothes, and a thick gold chain around his neck, was firmly tied. A blindfold was tied tightly around his eyes. I looked at him closely but realized that he didn't look familiar. Who's that? I turned to Stan. His name is Greg. He runs a little bar on the edge of town. But that's not his main livelihood. I found out that his main source of income is from activities like the one he did with your brother. So he's a mercenary. He hasn't told us anything yet, except that he's been paid to cause an accident. Did he say who it was? Who paid him? Unfortunately, he hasn't told us that yet. But don't worry. We've got forensics on it, and he'll talk soon. I noticed on the neck and arms of the prisoner the marks of recent torture. But I didn't feel the slightest bit sorry for him. You bastard. Answer me. Why did you do it? Who hired you? I jumped up to him and gave him a few punches myself. Stan stayed where he was, giving me a chance to interrogate him myself. My blows blew the blindfold off his eyes, and when he saw me I could see a look of surprise in his eyes. You, he asked. I didn't know what his question meant. Tell me. Who hired you? My brother has done nothing to anyone. Why was he to be killed? But the prisoner only grinned ironically. Stan called me over and told me not to worry. Though Greg does his job very neatly, without a trace, he will do anything to get the information I need. I tried a few more times to get answers on my own, but Greg was silent, only occasionally spitting blood after a beating. Eventually, I headed home, thanking Stan for the job he had done. I drove and replayed before my eyes the events that had transpired there in the basement. The man's face was imprinted in my memory, his evil smirk only making me hate his customer. At that moment I was ready to give up everything just to find out who exactly was behind it all. "Where have you been?" Gabrielle asked when I was home. "What happened to you?" She noticed my wrinkled appearance and the blood on my hands. "Stay out of it. I was just on a business trip." "But what kind of business is that? What did you get yourself into?" I said stay out of it. I went to the bathroom, ignoring my wife's next questions. I didn't want to drag her into it. I went out on the terrace and went over all the information I had in my head again. I remembered the day of the accident again, and then the thought occurred to me that perhaps it wasn't my brother they wanted to kill, but me. After all, I should have been the one driving the van that had gone off the road that day. But I also didn't understand why they wanted to kill me. I didn't owe anyone anything, and I don't remember any actions that could have led to this. Without waiting for the morning, I called Stan right away and told him what I had guessed. He promised to work on this version. I went to bed, but I could not sleep for a long time. My wife had been asleep for a long time, and I looked up at the ceiling as if an answer were to appear to me from there. The next night Stan called and said he knew exactly who was behind the crime. "Who? Give me a name," I questioned impatiently. "Does Tom Stone mean anything to you?" "No. I don't know who he is, and I've never come across him." "Who is this Stone? What does he want from me? What did you find out?" Stan told me that Stone owned a chain of stores, one of which my wife happened to work in. I couldn't figure out how it was all connected. After sitting for a while, I walked over to the kitchen where my wife was cooking dinner. "Gabriella, what can you tell me about your Mr. Stone?" "Why?" She didn't answer right away. "Why are you so interested in him?" "I am." "You work in his store, don't you?" "Yes, I do." "And what can you tell me about him?" Gabriella stepped away from the stove and started chaotically chopping herbs on the cutting board. "Nothing much, I've only seen him a few times." "Why?" "No reason. Just wondering." I waited for her to finish cooking. I spent my waiting time looking at today's paper. I could see that Gabriella got a little agitated after I asked her about her principal, but I didn't know why yet. I did not ask her any more questions, we exchanged a few more phrases, but on a different subject. The next day, on Sunday, Stan called me and invited me to go to a meeting with him. He did not say why, and this intrigued me greatly. Without thinking twice, I drove the car and rushed to the agreed place of the meeting. I got there as soon as I could. Stan and some of his cronies were already there, waiting for me in their car. I parked, got out of the car, and hurried over to him. Stan opened the door of his car and I got in beside him. "Dan, I've got some information that will help you figure out your case." "Yeah? Tell me. What did you find out?" I was getting impatient. "I found something out, but it's not going to be pleasant news for you." "Tell me, what's your relationship with your wife?" "It's okay. It's just a relationship." I was intrigued by his question. "What happened?" "It has nothing to do with her. Here's the thing." He took a paper envelope out of his briefcase and offered me to open it myself. I did not even guess what was inside, put my hand inside, and took out some more photos. I could see Gabriella meeting with the very same Tom Stone. There were several pictures. I started flipping through them one by one, and each one showed me more and more information. I saw pictures of them as lovers. Also, some of them showed them talking about something. "What is this?" I asked with bewilderment. "It's that your wife is not faithful to you. She's having an affair with Stone." "You didn't know that?" "No. That's the first I've heard of it." "How could she?" I kept flipping through the photos one by one. "How did you know that?" "Well, Stone's not as tough as his partner in crime. He cracked almost immediately, and he confessed everything to me. He ordered Greg to kill you. But I guess he didn't know you weren't driving the van that day. And your brother was in an accident." That information struck me to the core. I was so mad at my wife and that Stone guy. I never would have guessed she'd be capable of such a thing. Does my wife know that Stone ordered my death? My sources tell me she knows all about it. Besides, she gave Stone the idea herself. I felt the world collapse around me and everything was shrouded in a black fog. Stan motioned for me to get out of the car and walked me around the corner of the abandoned building where we had met him. There on his knees was the bound Stone. Stan said nothing to me, but handed me the gun, giving me the opportunity to exact my own vengeance. I also silently took the gun and pointed it at Stone. I saw his eyes fill with fear. It was as if the world had stopped at that moment. Everything around me disappeared, and all that was left was me, Stone, and my hatred. The state of nothingness was dispelled by the gunshot as I pulled the trigger, and the man in the expensive suit collapsed to the floor with his head blown off. I put the gun down. Stan walked over and gently picked it up. I understand you. And I understand that your revenge is not yet satisfied. He looked me in the eye when I turned to him. Do what you want with her. She's not my wife anymore. I got into my car and drove to the countryside, where there was a small lake with a beautiful view. I wanted to be alone. After a while, I went to visit my brother in the hospital. We had a nice chat with him. As I was leaving his room, a policeman stopped me in the hallway. He informed me that they had received a report of a kidnapping. A witness saw several masked men pushing my wife into a car as she was returning from the store with her purchases. I replied that I didn't know anything about that. All that mattered to me was